All right, in Washington, all eyes are on the Fed as Chairman Ben Bernanke takes center stage for day 2 of his testimony. Investors and lawmakers, they're all going to be looking for signals that the economy is back on track, allowing for the Fed to maybe take the foot of the stimulus pedal off, or at least make it a little lighter, right? One man who pays attention to what Fed Chair Ben Bernanke has to say is Republican Congressman Scott Rigell, who serves on the House Budget and Armed Services Committees. He also represents the district with the most exposure to military operations at a time when the defense budget, indeed the entire nation's budget, is still unresolved. He joins us right now. So good to have you here, Congressman.
Thank you, Trish. Thank you for having me on.
So you heard Ben Bernanke yesterday. You heard his testimony. Do you feel like the Fed is committed enough to at the very least, tapering as early as this fall?
Well, I think the chairman's cautiousness about the economy is warranted. It is fragile. That said, the Fed can't continue to increase the money supply like it's doing. It's got to taper down. We've got to let rates at some point start to rise to a normal level. It's really an artificial suppression of rates that we're seeing here. And that too poses a risk just as much as unemployment or a sluggish economy.
Well, let's talk about those risks. I mean, we've seen this movie before, right, in a pretty bad way. When you think about the low interest rate environment we were in leading up to the crisis of 2008, are you worried at all, Congressman, that this very low interest rate environment, all of this bond buying by the Fed, is creating an asset bubble somewhere in this economy?
Well, I've lived through this. I'm an automobile dealer by profession, and I experienced that horrific time, the fall of 08. The first and second quarter of 09 were just extraordinarily challenging, I think, for all businesses. I think the key here is to gradually go in the right direction. But underlying all of this, Trish, I think, is the key is the actual agreement on a federal budget. And I said for so long that the Democrats have not met us in the Senate with what we've done in the House, that now we've got a case where they've passed a budget, we've passed a budget, we're not going to conference.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of, I think, Ben Bernanke's points, Congressman, has been that he's doing all he can, but it takes both monetary and fiscal stimulus to really get an economy back on track.
We're in full agreement on that. And look, when we come up to this August recess and there's a vote for adjournment, I'm voting no. And I encourage all of my colleagues to vote no, because our work is not done here. In the House, we've passed just 3 of our appropriations bills. There are 12 in total. 6 are queued up to go on the House floor. We need to get to those. I just don't see a path right now of us passing all 12 in time to meet our obligation for that September 30th budget close.
Certainly sounds like you're not that optimistic. If we don't actually meet that deadline, what does it mean?
Well, it means more uncertainty, Trish, and this is what, businesses and families they're over it, really. I mean, I really think that we ought to be in session 6 days a week, starting at 8 a.m. in the morning, going until 7 p.m. at night, 6 days a week, just like we do in the private enterprise if things are going sideways on us. And that's where we are as a country. And look, I think that Republicans have the better ideas on energy and a host of ideas. But both parties, in my view, are equally responsible for the gridlock that we have here.
And you don't see it getting any better right now. I mean, it felt, at least the last several months, it felt a little bit better. It felt like we saw a little bit more bipartisanship. It sounds to me like you're saying it's breaking down again, and as a result, deadlines not being met.
Look, I'm inherently an optimistic person, and today on the Capitol steps, there'll be about 70 of us, part of a group called No Labels, equally divided among Democrats and Republicans. It's bicameral. Members of the Senate and House will be there. And it doesn't mean that we're not all moderates. In fact, I'm a fiscal conservative. People know that. And I have some dear friends who are on the more liberal side. But we're starting out with this idea of what do we agree on. And there are 9 bills that we're going to announce today on the Capitol steps. This is a good first step. And I tell you, I passed some energy legislation about a month ago. And I noticed there were 14 Democrats that voted for it. And virtually all of them are part of No Labels. And I've gotten to know them through that organization.
Yeah. Back to Mr. Bernanke for a moment. You're critical of all this bond buying. You're critical of these very low interest rates. What would you recommend? I mean, you know, there is a certain separation of church and state here, but what should he be doing differently right now, Congressman?
Well, I'd say just a bit more of we're going to have to deal with reality as American people. The Fed can't continue to suppress rates to literally zero at the central bank. Over time, it's got to come up just a bit to reflect a more normal environment. I think that
do you
what'll
think that would
happen
actually help the economy? I mean, there's some folks that would say maybe the threat of higher interest rates in the future
Trish, I know this is counterintuitive.
To inspire people to go out there and borrow.
I know it may seem counterintuitive, but we are in a false state of security here right now with interest rates. This is not a normal environment. And the only way this is happening is an increase in the money supply, generally. So this, too, threatens our country. And what I would say is a gradual glide slope, not down, but up, just a gradual glide slope over time to have. Really, we need to deal with the fiscal reality here, both in Washington and across America. And look, we can survive, you know, a normal interest rate environment, but that's actually better for savers. Some of our seniors would actually earn a little bit. I'm not talking about a sharp increase in the short run, Trish, but just over time. The chairman needs to make it clear that we've got to get back to a more normal environment.
And this links back to your budget concerns. In other words, if we're not able to come to some kind of agreement on a budget, the market theoretically might force us to have higher interest rates anyway. And that's the last thing you want, is to be forced into that kind of situation.
Trish, we're better than this as the American people. You know, men and women have sacrificed for this country at a great and high expense. I think about that. I think about the next generation that's coming, and frankly, I look around at what's happening here in Washington, and it compels me to say what I think needs to be said and do what must be done. We need to pass all 12 appropriations bills well in time to go to conference with the Senate. I'm urging leadership and my colleagues that we need to go to conference. Sure, that the distance between the two budgets is great, $91 billion. But that's not a reason to disengage and not talk with one another. All
right. Well, keep trying there, Congressman. Good to have you on the show. Representative Scott Rigell.